Welcome back, everyone. We are back with another episode of the NerdRabbit Podcast. Today, we have Rob Whelan from Big Cloud Country. Welcome, Rob. Tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me. My name is Rob Whelan. I live in Austin, Texas. I've been in cloud computing for about 10 years. Before that, I was a submarine officer and did a stint in the commercial nuclear energy industry, and got really excited about the possibilities of cloud back in maybe 2013, 2014, when it was pretty new. And since then, I have been at a startup, raised some capital, built a team that was in the healthcare space, and then got into cloud consulting because my passion is in data analytics, what you can do with data, how you can make it work for your business. And there is an awful lot of options in the cloud. That's the best place to do it. And for the last 3 years, I've been running a small data analytics consulting firm called Big Cloud Country. And we are an AWS consulting partner. And we help customers, mostly in the SMB space, make sense of their data.
Excellent. Thanks for the intro, Rob. And that really does bring us to our point. You obviously talked a good bit about data there and how your cloud journey led you to kind of finding that that's the problems that you really wanted to solve in the cloud. And it is a big one that needs to be solved in the cloud. In the modern world, I want to say, just because not the tech industry, manufacturing businesses, aerospace, everyone has all of this data they need to make sense of for whatever their endeavors are. And there's a lot of different ways to approach that depending on what the need is. So rather than cover all of them, because that would be a 20-year podcast, we're going to cover one in about 20 minutes about something pretty isolated, which is data lakes. This has been a topic that has been of particular interest in the cloud community. I think as a lot of companies have moved to the cloud from an on-prem setup, the notion of big data and what that can be and what you can do with massive amounts of storage and all the other kind of things that the cloud can really enable has become more attainable to a lot of companies in the last decade in a way that they weren't in the past. So today we're going to talk a little more about data lakes, what they are, how they work, what can you benefit from setting up a data lake, and in what way can you benefit from that? And then lastly, what are going to be some obstacles you might face if that's the path you choose to take? So to start, Rob, walk everyone through a little more about what a data lake is.
Absolutely. A data lake is a cheap way to store a great deal of unstructured data in flat files. And you think of it as a single repository for all your data, where you don't have to worry about deleting data, structuring it the right way so you can read it, and you don't have to worry about the schema that you stored it in. You just put everything there, and it's available for you to use later. The reason these became so popular is really because of the cloud. So AWS, with their S3 service, S3 is a crazy cheap way to store lots and lots of data, and you're never going to lose it either. So S3 has significantly reduced the cost of storage, and it's also expanded your opportunities for what you can do with data, because you don't have to make a ton of decisions ahead of time about what to do with the data. And now, as we'll see later, there's another side to that coin where things can get disorganized very quickly. But data lakes are a way to store lots and lots of, I'll call it cold data. This isn't data that's going to be available on a query that's in like single-digit milliseconds.
No hierarchy really at this point yet. The lake is definitely a good way of looking at it. Water at the bottom might show up at the top. It's just all over the place. It's just a big lake.
Yeah. And the original, just some quick history, the original data lake was in the Hadoop ecosystem, which some of your listeners will probably remember that. And that was limited by how many servers you had in your Hadoop file system. But with S3, it's unlimited. So they become very popular as a way to store a ton of data, and also there's very few boundaries between data sets. So if we're talking about typical SaaS systems, Salesforce and say your email, two different systems, they don't talk to each other. But in a data lake, you just put them in different folders and you can access them freely. So lots of advantages there.
Yeah, and I mean, even with Salesforce, they're a great software. They have a lot of built-in integrations that you can benefit from that might make it so you can put some things together. But you might use some in-house tools you built. You might use some other third-party systems that aren't as API friendly. And the ability to still have a way to consolidate that data and cross-reference it for an analytics purposes obviously can have its long-term business value. And again, like you mentioned, it's that value that's not planned up front necessarily, that a more structured environment would necessitate.
Yeah, and I'll expand on that. So the pace of technological change today is so fast. If you take too much time to sort of do a bunch of hand wringing over like how you're going to store and structure the data, you're actually spending a lot of time doing that, and you might miss out on opportunities. So that's one value of the data lake. Again, you just put data in S3. Now, you do have to do some planning and analysis to figure out how you're going to structure it, how people are going to access it, because you have to find it. But things are moving so fast that there's no reason not to put your data in a data lake.
Yeah, and it's not that there's no structure at all to it, because S3 is a tool that does have various layers to how frequently accessed is this data, how quickly do you need it, all this kind of stuff. So you have to have some level of consideration into how that data moves, the time frames that are necessary, but it is unlimited in the scale of which you can apply that.
Let me add something to that about the limitlessness of it. So we did a project recently where a large American car company had basically 1 billion data points coming in per day. And we would enrich those data points with like location data and some other web data. And that was probably, 50 to 100 gigabytes of data per day. So that's a lot. The technique we had to use in order to be able to explore that data without the queries taking too long is called partitioning. So in S3 with the data lake, what you can do is create your folder structure for the files you're saving to indicate what partition it needs to be in. In our case, we partition the data by day. So every midnight every day, new day, we'd start a new partition and start adding files there. The year, month, day were all 3 different files. So partitioning is one of the most fundamental aspects of data lake organization. So yes, it's limitless, but with partitioning, you get to sort of key in on where exactly stuff is going to land.
Yeah, because in the end, you're doing this because you do want to use the data. You don't want to just have it so you can have it in your pocket, just, hey, look at all this data I have. You want to do something with it. So this is a way for you to relatively easily get all this data stored in a way that can be usable in the future. And then when you find these use cases that are going to provide value to your organization, you can apply that then, right? Whether it be analytics, whether it be AI, all these other kind of hot things that are taking over as big data has become more accessible.
Yeah. So exploring and figuring out use cases, that's another big advantage of data lakes. I mentioned at the beginning, you don't have to worry about deleting data. Most data lakes are append only, meaning you only add data to it. Now there's some like special situations where you may need to update records as new data comes in. There's tools for that, like Apache Iceberg and Hudi, I think are 2 of the main open source ones. But by and large, we're only adding data to the data lake. And so why is that important for like use case exploration? I had a customer who had, and this is kind of common, had a database, it was a MySQL database, and that stored the company's, like all the company's data, all in MySQL. They weren't aware of the possibilities with S3. By the way, the difference between a data lake and a database is a server with like very specific structures inside of it, like tables. And the query, there's a very specific query language, and
it's hierarchical from the jump. From the jump, it's made to be used for purposes with that data. The data is never just here, store it and figure it out later. It's very intentional from the jump.
Yeah. And whereas S3, a data lake, is much more loose. Anyway, this company had all their data in MySQL, and they didn't have any read replicas. They wanted to do analytics, but they were worried about pushing over the database and breaking it. And so that's a really common issue with live databases that you just have to worry about with data lakes. So because you're not going to break a data lake. What we did for this customer is we just took a copy of everything that was in the database, put in S3 as CSV files, and ran a bunch of ad hoc exploration on it, meaning we had to explore, we had to figure out how we were going to modify the data. Once we figured that out in the data lake, then we could run those queries and modifications on the live database. So exploration is cheap and fast with the data lake.
And it's post-storage. It's not that you're having to explore this pre-storing the data. And that obviously can make a business very lean in their ability to pursue some of these things. It's exciting. Yeah. So obviously there's one use case I think that is incredibly common, which is analytics. We talked a little bit about kind of how if you have all these various systems, Salesforce and your email, it can bring those together for analytics. Can you talk more about some of the ways that data lakes really empower companies to make creative analytics that might be beneficial?
Yeah. And analytics in my mind is like, doing analysis to figure out what's going on in your business, figure out what the actual truth is. So analytics usually sits between your raw data and the dashboard. The dashboard, people think of QuickSight, Tableau, Power BI, nice pictures, good charts.
The visualization side of it, right?
The visualization, yeah. And there's some, analysis and exploration you can do inside the dashboard. But how do you get from the raw data to the actual dashboard? It's not always obvious. You have to do quite a bit of work to figure out what the value is inside this data. And that's where a data lake comes into play. So very specifically, I'll talk you through how we do it. So I mentioned at the beginning that a data lake in S3 is in AWS is S3 buckets. We usually design the data lake with 3 buckets. The first bucket we call the drop zone. That's your raw data where the data hasn't been touched. You just export it from your source, put a copy in the data lake, drop zone. The second bucket we call the analytics zone. That's where the data is cleaned up a little bit, organized by day maybe. There's some validation there, meaning if your date format in the drop zone is kind of crazy, you'll validate it and make sure the date is usable in the analytics zone. That takes some processing. And then this is the important point that you were mentioning. The other thing we do in the analytics zone is we analyze things. So Amazon has a service called Athena. Athena is a service that lets you run SQL queries against your data lake. You're running SQL queries to find out what's valuable in that data. The queries are cheap. if your data lake is organized, efficiently, they're fast queries, cost nothing. But once you figure out your use case, then you put the data into the final bucket, which we call the curated zone. And the curated zone is just a staging area for the dashboard. So here's an example. I'll go back to this car company. So the incoming data would be somewhat raw, and I mentioned in the analytics zone, we would enrich it with location data and maybe understand a little bit about the device. This was ad data, so the device that the ad was viewed on. We wanted to find out how many ads were shown in each city. We also want to find out what devices were being used to see these ads. So those are aggregation steps that we could perform in the analytics zone and drop into the curated zone. Super cheap, super fast. Now it's in the curated zone. That's clean, useful data. And then we'd just fetch it and put it into the dashboard. Now you got a nice visualization. But this is the most important point. Since we did the hard work inside the data lake in those three zones, you can trust the data in your dashboard. And Chris, there are so many companies and executives who look at their dashboard, and a big thing of what they're wondering is, can I really trust this?
Well, for instance, is the query that needs to be running the one that's running? Is the data accurate, or is it being manipulated in any way for someone to save their own job, respectively? And having a very consolidated source like this that's relatively secure allows you to have certainty that through these various layers of cleaning that you're working with a good source. Unlike a database where anyone who has access to that database with write access can be pretty devastating.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, databases are great. They're fast. It takes a lot of care and feeding to make sure the data going into it is valid. It's really, I always struggle to make that sound really cool, but data validation is one of the most important things you can do with your data. It simply means, like, is the data in a format that is useful to your business, and are the values representative of reality? So
it's like peer review in the scientific method. If like this isn't repeatable, it's not science, right? So that validation aspect, if you're not able to validate it, is it real? If you can't answer that, you shouldn't necessarily use the insights with a lot of confidence.
Peer review for data. That's what data validation is. All right.
Yep.
You heard it here first on the NerdRabbit podcast.
I hope you heard it here first. If someone else beat us there, I'm not going to take credit. Just let us all know. Now, we brought up analytics there, another exciting one, especially now because, analytics have been something businesses have tried to benefit from for a while, but something I think has taken over the kind of public zeitgeist in the tech world over the last year or two has been AI. How companies can use AI, especially because there's a lot of companies out there who don't necessarily understand how I get involved in this. But every company usually has some degree of data they're working with, some ways they hope to benefit from it, whether they don't know a clear path forwards. I know AI is playing a big part in how we make this more accessible. So can you walk people more through how you're seeing AI start to interact with data lake environments?
Yeah, I'll talk a bit about AI and where I think it's going and how you can really leverage your data in the best way possible with the data lake. So generative AI is, we all know it from ChatGPT, and it, some people jokingly call it like the sentence completion website. And it does that. It does complete sentences. Obviously, there's so much more going on. People are using it to, create code, programming code.
Well, we all know the LLMs, right? The large language models, which is why we think of chat bots and all this other kind of stuff. But admittedly, before I used ChatGPT for the first time, I used Midjourney, which is an LLM, but it's also an image generator. So there's a little more going on there. And that was one of my first experience with generative AI. And I'm like, wow, this is Pretty
That's
cool.
so interesting. I didn't realize Midjourney came out before ChatGPT.
Well,
Is that
yeah, I think so
that's
because it was
so
on.
yeah
It
yeah
was on. I'm pretty sure I used it first. It was on Discord, and my friend sent it over because,
yeah
I've done, as you can see with the music stuff, I've done music for years, and he's an artist who is like always trying to see how can I work with different art creators and this that for a part of what I'm doing, and that
yeah.
naturally showed up pretty quick when it came out.
That's cool. I mean, look, these technologies, these super large models, just sort of, and different modes, images and text kind of hit. Um,
And the
but
association
anyway,
between the two, right? Like the fact that these images and text actually relate to each other in ways where I write this text in and an image generates based on that, which is, I mean,
yeah,
pretty impressive when you really think about just a few years ago.
yeah, yeah, it is. And so, having a lot of conversations with businesses, people are eager to use AI. It's not clear what the use cases are going to be, like where the true utility is. So, for example, one of the first ways, aside from like summarizing text and creating code or answering questions, so those are things you can use the interface for. But what if you want to use it on your own domain? So one of the first use cases that came out was AI-powered search, and the technique for that is called retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. The idea here is, when you get in a chat GPT and you type in a prompt, it's going to use your prompt to answer your question, plus it's the knowledge embedded in its weights. But if you could ask it a question about your set of documents, what you can do first is run a search over your documents, get chunks of text that are relevant to your question, and then insert that into your prompt. Now your prompt is not one question, but a question plus 5 paragraphs from different documents around your database. And then the large language model can do reasoning on your data. So that's cool. That's like I call sort of an entry level domain specific use of AI. But where's it going to go after that? I'll tell you a couple different use cases, and then I'll tie it back to how data lakes are a really important way to prepare for that. So aside from AI powered search, there's going to be use cases like, there are use cases like question answering, knowledge bases. So knowledge base is like an FAQ for your company, so to speak.
Yeah, and actually on that, I think Amazon Q just was launched the other day, specifically kind of addressing that for a lot of companies. So again, Amazon, they want to get their toes in the generative AI water just like everybody else.
Yeah, and their Bedrock solution is a great environment. It's just so easy to run these open source models. So question answering, summarization. There's some work being done in reasoning. So maybe you've seen agents being written about. Agents are essentially small programs that answer not just one prompt, but maybe a sequence of prompts, or they are able to call another system to retrieve information as part of one of those prompts. So agents are going to perform reasoning for you. An example that's come up let me back up. Here's an example of a multi-step prompt that's a great use case for an agent. So let's say you're doing patient intake for a hospital. You're receiving these faxes, and you have to not only get the information off the fax, but you also have to decide how urgent it is to call that person. So that's 2 steps. The first step is to read the fax. I guess it's 3 steps. The second step is to extract the structured data out of it: name, date of birth, address, condition. And then finally, decide how urgent is it to call that person. Those are 3 completely different AI domains. So optical character recognition, structured data extraction, and then recommendations. Okay, those are some examples of use cases for AI and where we're going. But I said earlier, we don't really know what the utility is. So let's talk about data lakes. We really do think that AI is going to change everything, but we just don't know in what order. So what's going to come first? What's going to come second? Not sure yet. In order to ride this wave and not be left behind, you're going to have to do some experimentation, and your experimentation has to be cheap and fast. So that's a little bit of a rhyme with the data lake approach. With data lakes, storage is cheap, analytics and exploration is fast. So let's unpack that a little bit with data lakes. Why would you need a data lake for generative AI use cases? Well, let's talk about that sort of the AI-powered search use case first. Data lakes can store any kind of file, including, say, like Microsoft Word documents or PDFs. So if you want to exercise some kind of search use case, you need to have your documents readily available. You need to know where they are, how relevant they are they recent, are they old, and in what condition, they're in. Data lake is ideal for that because let's say you've got 1,000 PDFs of product documentation or reports that have been written. You first want to get the text off of that PDF. So will you need to use OCR? Can you just read it directly? All right, now you've got the data off of PDF and it's in raw text files. So that might be the PDFs are in the drop zone, your text files are in the analytics zone. Now you might want to enrich that data with metadata about the documents. So who was it written by? When was it written? What are a list of the topics that can be found in this document? What questions can be answered in this document? That's metadata that's enriching it. And again, it's appropriate for like the analytics zone. And finally, you could put that, the resulting data in the curated zone or in like a vector database for AI. But the point is, you're not going to do an AI search project with just a pile of PDFs. You're going to need to process that data. And that is the first thing people come across when they want to harness the power of AI on their own domain. You've got to get the data in a usable state. And data lakes are just perfect for that.
Yeah, and I think that's really always, when I've talked to anyone about AI, especially if they're really early stage and exploring it, it's what do we want from it, right? We want to understand what are we going to do with this thing. And then when you say this is what we want to do, okay, well, this is AI. It's intelligent, but you have to give it something to work with. It's, we go back, I think, before all this generative AI stuff kicked off, we had a lot of interest in machine learning technology for a number of years. Like that's been a growing field for a while. And I still think we're going to continue to see that because it's a particular branch of AI. But that notion that you need to use this data you have to derive beneficial insights that you can do if you have a human doing actual math on the data and analytics, but it's this notion that machine learning can continue to build on that in a way that's really efficient for companies. And AI is going to take that in a lot of other very hands-on ways to use that data, ways that ML maybe has been a little more used for insights. AI might be used more for actually delivering on things for people. So it's really exciting.
Yes. Yeah, AI is going to perform work that is pure drudgery for humans. And I believe AI will assist and augment humans. It's not going to replace humans.
No.
But the work that we're particularly bad at, swivel chair work, getting an email with an Excel file attached to it, got to open that email, read the data, copy and paste it into Salesforce or Trello or something like that. That's robotic work that's prone to error, but it's valuable because we do need to, we need to communicate in some way, shape, or form. But movement of data is, AI should be doing that.
Well, and the whole point of it has to be repetitive in some way for AI to work, because AI learns from that repetition, those patterns, right? So the mundanity you talked about, if it's mundane, odds are it's extremely repetitive, which means AI can derive a lot of insight on how to do it well.
On that note, I'll make this pitch for fine tuning. So if you have a workflow that is repetitive and you've got, or can get, many examples of it. So for example, this decision whether or not to call the patient right away, that is a nice candidate for a fine-tuned model. So a fine-tuned model, and I'll tie this back to data lakes. A fine-tuned model is simply like you take an open source model like Llama or Claude, and you take and there's going to be many layers of weights. I think I'm not going to quote how many layers are because I'm going to misquote, but let's just say there's 50 layers of computations that need to go through. You take the last 1 or 2 layers and you modify those weights so that it matches the workflow that you're going to do. So basically the large language model is the same. It has all the power of reasoning and the English language and knowledge up to the last, 47th, 48th layer. And these last 2 layers get tweaked so it's specific to your use case. Now you have kind of a rock solid model that lacks or it's going to be more deterministic when you use it but if you don't fine tune it, there's always variability in how the large language models respond to your prompts. Okay, so how do you get to a fine-tuned state? Well, you need at least 1,000, maybe 10,000 examples, and the data has to be in a very specific format. Again, how do you get there? Well, you need to have accessibility to your source data, and you need a cheap and easy way to kind of hack and slash and explore it, and that's a data lake. So put your data in S3 and find out ways to extract that data.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. I think for a lot of companies, data storage is now cheap. It's accessible from like a work standpoint just because they don't have to do all this stuff in an on-prem setup. They can just do it when they choose to do it and can find a way to do it in a cost-efficient way. And again, they can do it in a way that's structured in a sense that we're setting up our data lake right, but all the specific use cases of what they're going to do can come up later, which is important because none of us, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't see the future and what business needs are going to be. We have some assumptions, but it's really nice to be able to use this data in the future without knowing the use cases yet. And data lakes are a huge enabler there.
My last thought on this is, now you're right, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to be around the corner. But what we do know is how our business works. And if we start thinking about our business in terms of workflows and tasks, and what data and systems represent those workflows, and how can I get that data, just copies of the data into S3. Now you're thinking long-term, and you are positioning yourself to be in a really good spot as the true utility of AI starts to surface. So think about your day, think about your business and what you do in terms of workflows. Don't think really about the systems, and because those can change. We use systems to satisfy workflows that our business needs to do. So think about the core workflows and how those can be represented in data.
Yep. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. You have to do all the preparation of your data lake and how your data is going to exist so that when the opportunity of new AI ideas, concepts, technologies comes along, you have a solid data
ready to go.
Lake, place, so on and so forth to work with. Well, Rob, always a pleasure talking with you. I feel like we've covered a pretty good amount of the data lake stuff. Obviously, it's a powerful tool that's been around for a few years, but is really just starting to hit its stride with some of the new advancements in AI technology. Again, this is Rob Whelan at Big Cloud Country. you can reach out to him or us here at NerdRabbit if you ever have questions about data lakes, about AI, about analytics. We are glad to help out however we can. But again, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thanks for the time, Chris. It was great chatting with you.
Always fun. And again, everyone, let us know whatever you need, and we will be here next time to chat with you about some more cloud topics.